Where is Baron? Did Baron leave?
I'm good.
Y'all ready? No. Are you live? I'm not, the PIO might be upstairs.
You,
We've always had the microphones off.
I don't. Madam Clerk, I guess we will call this meeting of the Richland County Affordable Housing Ad Hoc Committee to order, and we'll take the roll for attendance.
Teratio,
Here.
Weaver, Baron.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. And hopefully we'll have Mr. Weaver here soon. That brings us to item 2, the approval of our minutes from March 19th, 2024. Those can be found on pages 4 through 7 of our agenda packet. Is there a motion regarding the minutes?
To approve.
I'll second it. Any further discussion? Hearing none, I will take the roll to approve the minutes.
Teratio,
Yes?
Baron.
Yes.
Motion approved.
Thank you. That brings us to item 3, the adoption of the agenda. Is there any proposed changes to the agenda from staff?
No requested changes.
Okay, thank you. Is there a motion regarding the agenda?
So moved.
I'll second that. Any discussion regarding the agenda? All right, I will take the vote.
Teratio,
Yes?
Baron.
Yes.
Motion approved.
All right, that will bring us to item 4, our items for discussion and action. 4A is an affordable housing fundamental presentation that is found on pages 8 through 26, yes, of our packet. And I believe ACA Jensen would like to help lead that discussion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Am I recognized?
Yes, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So very briefly, this is as much for the council or the committee, excuse me, as for the folks at home who are following along and are very interested in this topic. We have a lot of people in our community who are concerned about affordable housing and who are engaged actively in providing it or attempting to provide it. So there's a, Madam Chair, if you go to, excuse me, Madam Clerk, the next slide, please. There we go. So in this presentation, there are a few key points that I wanted to get across, and I'm not going to read through these because I'm going to go through them in subsequent slides. So if you would go to the next slide. Really quickly, affordable is a very subjective term. Obviously, what is affordable in one location is not affordable in another. What's affordable here in Richland County may not be affordable in other places and vice versa. And so when we talk about it, we have to have a point of reference. And so typically they use the area median income as a point of reference. That's what the federal government uses in all their programs when they're talking about whether something is affordable or not. And so when we talk a little bit about this, you hear people frequently say there's insufficient affordable housing or there's a lack of affordable housing. And so the question is, what does that mean exactly? And typically what it's talking about is the fact that there's a series of, or a broad spectrum of housing in every community. And what they're saying is that the spectrum doesn't address or doesn't sufficiently meet a segment of the population. And again, how you determine what that segment is, what it's affordable to, is very subjective. And I know this committee has already talked about that and has a definition of what it is. And as we move further along, we're going to need to narrow down and put some metrics to that to specifically say it's this much, it's this range, it's these people that when we say affordable. Because again, housing that may be affordable to one person is not affordable to another. And the other interesting thing to understand is that there is a segment of our population that can't afford housing regardless of the price. We could give them a brand new house for free and they couldn't pay the taxes, the insurance, the utilities, the upkeep, and so forth. And that's just something that doesn't get discussed very often when we're talking about affordable housing, but is an important part of the discussion. And then lastly, a very simple thing that I think everybody understands, home builders, people building can't lose, if they don't make a profit, they go out of business. If they go out of business, then nothing gets built. And that's something that just, again, that's not discussed very often. Next slide, please. Another interesting thing is that housing is effectively a commodity. The value of housing goes up based on supply and demand or goes down. During the Great Recession, when no housing was being built, the value still went down, which was very odd because the supply didn't go up, but the prices or values of them went down. But again, it was a demand issue because what happening were folks were either moving in with each other or they were moving back to live with their parents or with their kids. And so the demand actually went down at the same time as the supply being stagnant. A very odd situation, but it happened. And that's what happens sometimes. The other thing that you have to understand is that the cost to produce it affects the value of it. Just like, again, like a commodity, the cost to produce steel, the cost to produce aluminum affects the value regardless of supply and demand. Next slide, please. So these are just some of the ways that you can increase an affordable housing supply. So if you take a look at it, in other communities, I was actively involved in incentivizing the construction of new affordable housing using all of these different methods, density bonuses, waived or reduced impact fees, delayed impact fees, reducing the amount of amenities. That latter one is one of the interesting ones that, again, has not been discussed or is not discussed frequently. The fact is, a lot of codes, land development codes, require multifamily developments to have pools and tennis courts and other things without regard to whether or not the residents really want them or will use them. And that drives up the cost of the units and the cost to rent them. And it's one of the things that communities are not yet talking about, but I think that they should. Because again, if we're requiring amenities or open space or something that the community doesn't need, that just drives up the cost of the units. Another way to do it is to buy down the cost through direct payments. Vouchers, again, that's a very popular program because it allows people to choose the housing or to make a housing choice on their own independently and yet have assistance and bring the rent to within what is affordable to them. Partnerships with CHODOs, which are community housing development organizations, nonprofits, and other charitable foundations. In another jurisdiction, I worked with a very large national foundation who was doing single-family housing, affordable single-family housing, through a method where they own the land, but they don't own the structure on it. So when the folks move, they sell and they get whatever the increased value of their structure is, but the land value stays the same, which keeps it affordable in perpetuity. Very nice model. A little tricky to do. You have to have a really good partner, very skilled partner to be able to run a program like that.
Madam Chair.
Yes. Yes, Ms. Barron.
So could you further explain the buy down, the payments to buy down? Is that like is that a down payment plan where we would do the down payment program, or is it another method?
Yeah.
You're recognized.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am, it's all of those things. So there are multiple ways to do that. One of them is simply at the time the project is being built, the county or a charitable foundation will literally give money to the developer, which will then reduce their cost, and in exchange, they will then make a number of units affordable, or they agree for a period of time to keep them affordable. There are also programs that are down payment assistance that helps people get into their homes that's forgivable over a period of time. There are multiple different ways to do that.
If
Go
I,
ahead.
yeah, if I may, so essentially, and I'm just kind of, this is just a scenario. If we decided that we would do a buy down program to the point we could give those funds to the developer, and then in return we would have some type of say or negotiation with them on the cost of the unit. Is that how that works? Or we just give them X amount of dollars and trust that it meets the guidelines? I know you're laughing, but I'm like, in my head, I see some funny business.
Yeah. May I, Madam?
Yes, please.
Thank you. Yes, so typically it is a very extensive contract, and it's usually for a period of time, anywhere from 15 to 30 years. And there are very specific instructions that says, the folks who are renting can only meet, must have a median income of X or lower. The rent can only escalate so much over a period of time, or it must be tied to a CPI, or, and it starts at this lower rate. But yes, it's negotiated and it's set forth in a contract. And then the organization that pays the money down originally typically is the one who's responsible every 5 years to follow up and to do an analysis or some kind of an audit to confirm that they are still performing.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I know that it's just discussing things, but I know in South Carolina, something, unless it's a nonprofit, we wouldn't be able to give money to a for-profit entity to do something like that. So it would have to be a nonprofit, or because that's why we give tax incentives to try to get people to do certain things, because we can't give money to for-profit business like that.
Thank you for that clarification. Ms. Barron, did you have any further questions? I did also have a question about that, because one of my questions would be regarding, who would get access to these affordable units. So would it be an application process, a lottery process? In your experience, what have you seen that works well, or what are best practices there?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So I have seen all of those, and typically working with a nonprofit is usually the best way. Again, a nonprofit that does this, a CHODO, as they're called here, a community housing developer, one that is recognized by the federal government as doing this, that's your safest bet always. Also, you can look at housing authority is another one that is very typically given funds for this kind of an operation. Those are the safest ones to go with. If you go any other route, then yes, I would recommend getting an outside counsel or somebody who's skilled in this to do that kind of negotiations for you.
Thank you. Anything further on this? Okay, thank you. Please, oh, yes, Chair Mackey.
Thank you. I guess I want to say, because Attorney Wright kind of hit on it, but I feel like essentially the end result of what this would be, you could still accomplish through a tax incentive with the developer on the front end, right? So you basically, if we know this is the outcome we want, we could technically do the equivalent of a buyback, but just do it on the front end with a tax incentive so they're still getting that return back because they're not spending it. Is that kind of, would that fall into this same category in the end result?
ACA Jensen?
Thank you. Yes, and in fact, in other communities or in other states, this will frequently be done through a redevelopment agency and through a disproportionate tax, fee. My gosh, I'm drawing a blank all of a sudden. Yes, through a redevelopment agency where a portion of the tax will be set aside for a project, and we'll do something like that. Yes.
Thank you. Anything further?
No, thank you.
Okay, please continue.
Thank you. So next slide, please. So again, this leads into the discussion of the day for the committee. What can you do as the committee and the council with the funds that have been set aside through ARPA? And again, payments to extend affordable periods of existing housing, which, as the Attorney Wright has stated, in South Carolina would have to be handled a certain way through a nonprofit or so forth. Again, payments to an existing developer or the incentives, which can include density bonuses, deferred fees, and so forth. We had, in one jurisdiction, we had a program called 1,000 Homes in 120 Days, where the jurisdiction agreed to defer development fees, impact fees, for a period of time so they could pay them back over 5 years instead of immediately, and in exchange for an agreement to do housing of a certain cost and type and location, which was very successful. Again, we talked about vouchers, low cost and forgivable loans. Again, depended on South Carolina law, how you'd have to structure that. Partnership with a CHODO, a non-for-profit or charitable foundation. And then, the Housing Authority has a model where they actually go out and acquire units. And in one jurisdiction, the Housing Authority was extremely aggressive during the recession and bought more than 120 single-family homes in that area at very, very low prices that they were able then to keep affordable for a period of time. But again, it was a market fluke that we had for a period of years where prices went down dramatically, and they were able to accomplish that.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
So I just want to be clear. You're speaking. You said ARPA. We moved these funds to our general fund budget. So these are still things that we can do in our general fund, and because I know ARPA has its own rules. So I didn't want us to. I want to make sure that we are doing the right, or talking about the right pot of money.
That is correct. In the representation that you have is just information terms that he used, because whether we originally talked about money, but the money that you have are general fund dollars that can be used for any eligible program that this committee and or council chooses to use them for.
Thank you. And can I just take a moment and recognize other colleagues that are with us? I see Ms. Newton online, Mr. Pugh here, Ms. Mackey, and Mr. Livingston. Thank you all for being here. Thank you. And ACA Jensen, please continue.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, Ms. Mackey.
Thank you. Sorry. And I don't know, you might have another slide, so you might get to this, but one of the things I saw some other counties do with ARPA funds, and I know this, we're not but it's kind of like a template of what you've been able to see communities do. I saw them like purchase, they were able to use ARPA funds to purchase land that then they could say to developers, okay, we've already covered this land cost for you, the material is there per se, sewer and everything. And so that was an additional cost that then the developer didn't have to take on because we've already acquired and kind of gotten the land. And folks were able to do that with ARPA funds, which then allowed them to build at a more affordable rate because they didn't have to worry about that land piece. So I just wanted to point that out that was something else I saw with ARPA and kind of creating affordable housing.
Thank you, Chair Mackey. And I will also add that rhymes with some of the things that we do for economic development as well. I'll recognize Mr. Weaver.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess my question is for Mr. Brown. Mr. Brown, you mentioned deadlines. Is there something in the ARPA funds that they have to be expended by a certain point? I thought I remember in past meetings they had to be spent by some date.
So to answer your question directly, there is, but it is not relevant to this discussion.
Okay.
Because the money that we're talking about is not ARPA funds. But yes, sir, the money has to be obligated by the 2024 December. It has to be spent by 2026. But that is, again, not relevant to this particular discussion because the money that you're talking about, the $4 million, is general fund dollars. It started with one conversation and morphed into another over time. So now you're in the general fund dollar discussion of money that you have set aside to affect positively affordable housing in Richland County.
Okay, so the $4 million has no deadline.
That is correct.
Okay.
Only the budgetary decisions that you make
Okay.
in a given fiscal year.
Great, thank you.
Yes.
I'm
thank
sorry.
you. Okay. No, I love the discussion. Thank you.
I do want to say, I understand there's no deadline set, but I do think the issue of affordable housing is a real one that was really brought to light during COVID, which is a result of why ARPA funds came about. And so even though it's not tied to ARPA and we don't necessarily have this concrete deadline, I do think as a body, this is an issue that we should be looking to address sooner rather than not later with the $4 million, and then looking at long-term initiatives or plans after the $4 million. So there's not a deadline set per se, but I do think it's an issue that we should move faster on, as fast as we can. Folks are really out here. It is a real issue. As the county continues to grow, we know people are moving here more and more. We need to make sure that we have affordable housing for our folks that are living here and that need it now. So I just want to place, I think there is urgency behind it, even though there's not a stated deadline.
Heard, Madam Chair. Thank you. Yes, please, and with no further questions right now. Okay, please continue.
Thank you. That's the last slide for today. There are more slides, but those are really for a future day, and they were just for background discussion, talking about other things that can be done during the comprehensive plan process, such as accessory dwelling units, which Charleston is very aggressively moving forward with. There's many other ways to do this, but in terms of the $4 million that we're talking about now, these are the items that I think are things that can be done quickly, and that there are existing programs out there to take advantage of and existing formats that we don't have to reinvent the wheel.
Thank you, and I'm glad the names of those are changing because the historical names for units like that are maybe not as flattering as we might want them to be. So I guess at this point, we would welcome discussion from the committee and council members regarding just thoughts on, I've heard from a couple of people about thoughts on how to focus some of these monies. I think two of our big tasks here are, of course, moving this $4 million, as well as thinking about policies and maybe funding mechanisms to put in place for the future. So I'll just open the floor for discussion. Yes, sorry, I saw Mr. Weaver first.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would just like to say, I think acquiring property or building property should be the very last thing on our list because it's controversial, takes a long time. I don't think we need to do that. I think there's plenty of vacant things out there now that we can help folks with. Also, I think if we were to go back to some of our constituents and say the county was gonna buy a house in your neighborhood, even with the best of intentions, that maybe wasn't a rental house now, and we're turning it into a rental house, I don't think that's gonna go over well. You can imagine the horror stories that'll be going through the neighborhood of what's gonna happen to the house. So I say we deep six that. I think the easiest thing, quickest thing is to do vouchers, subsidized rent to an existing rental structure. There's plenty of folks that do that well. We can help fund that, and we can make it, unique or beneficial to Richland County by saying, maybe you have to be employed in Richland County or use it for first responders or whatever we want to do with it. But that's the quickest and easiest way to get the money on the street, so to speak.
Thank you. Ms. Barron?
Thank you. So I have a couple of things. I feel very strongly about the down payment programs because, again, I don't want to create another thing for us to do because we've not decided that we want to be in this quote unquote business. We know that we want to invest in this area. We know that it's a priority, but until we clearly define what it is that we want to do and how we want to address affordable housing, that I would just, I think that we've had lots of conversation about the down payment program, and I think Ms. Mackey last meeting brought up, targeting specific populations, whether it's educators or first responders. And, we can partner with an existing organization that could take that responsibility for us. And what that still accomplishes the goal that we set out to do. And that is addressing affordable housing in Richland County. I'm also a fan of, looking at another things that we did discuss was partnering with an entity that has housing, like Mr. Jensen, he mentioned the Housing Authority, whether it's the Housing Authority who already have existing properties that need to get put back online. I think at the end of the day for us, I agree with Ms. Mackey wholeheartedly. This is a crisis. And so because it's a crisis, we can't drag our feet in addressing this because this is one of the things that we have money for. And so because we have money for this, let's go ahead and just determine how we spend it. And whether it's, with the down payment program or getting properties back online that have not been online. But I think the best mechanism to do that is partnering with an existing agency. And then finally, I'd like to say that when we decide what it is that we're going to do and we do it, I do think that it does behoove us to continue the process that we've already set forth with a lot of the other things that we've done in the past, and that's get community input. And I'd like to see us do some type of survey or, whether it's with organizations that address affordable housing or just the general residents of Richland County, to do a survey to see what the needs are out there so that we're not just throwing things against the wall and seeing if they stick. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Barron. And if I can, I'd like to respond to one of those things. So you definitely, I think that we have some data on what is needed in Richland County. I think we can come up with that pretty quickly in terms of where folks need housing and what type of need there are. But specifically wanted to speak to something that maybe you kind of touched on and also Mr. Weaver touched on, which is, the community we know that we need to interact with the community when we're addressing housing, right? And so that speaks to a couple of different things, which is stigma surrounding affordable housing. Just because my job might not pay me as much as your job does not mean that I'm a bad person or a dirty person or an irresponsible person necessarily. I work in a right-to-work state. I might not have any income tomorrow, right? So just because someone does not have a certain kind of paycheck does not mean that they're a certain kind of person. And so what I would hope that we can also do as part of this work together is address some of the stigma and what is called NIMBYism, which is the not in my backyard point of view, which Mr. Weaver spoke to briefly in terms of, someone says, oh, well, they're building an accessible or an additional dwelling unit in their backyard. Oh, that's going to become a rental. Oh, that's terrible. Or, oh, the county is helping this landlord fix up this place. Now it's going to be more affordable and therefore bad. So I think that is something that we all need to be able to address maybe in ourselves and learn how to address as we talk to each other. Because what I can tell you is that when someone is able to better afford the house that they live in, and they don't have to work 2 jobs, and they don't have to work 60, 70, 80 hours a week to do that, they have more time on the weekend to mow their yard. They have more time to pick up around the house. They have more energy to make sure that the place that they live in is decent and a nice place, not just for them, but for the street that they live on. So I think that there are some things that we can definitely address with amongst ourselves and within our communities. Yes, Mr. Livingston.
Speaking of the $4 million that we set aside, that I think been setting aside long enough now, and I think we just really need to figure out a pathway to do something. And of course, we're not in that business, so my recommendation would be is that we find some chotos an opportunity or one of the housing trust funds or somebody and just do a proposal or something and say, we got $4 million. Like, tell us what you can do with our $4 million as it relates to dealing with affordable housing, and see what we get and just move forward. Because I don't know how to spend it. I'm not an expert in that area or whatever. But it would be nice to just simply give those groups an opportunity to tell us what they can do for that $4 million in terms of affordable housing. And then we can move forward, and then we can come back and talk about future uses of ways we're going to try to affect affordable housing in our community. But let's at least try to go ahead and spend that $4 million we've been sitting on forever.
Thank you, Mr. Livingston. Ms. Barron, did you want to be recognized?
I do.
Okay.
Mr. Livingston, that's why you the godfather of Richland County. I think that's an excellent idea. I really do. I think it's because it does show our community engagement. It gives people an opportunity to present something to us, and this is what they do, versus us trying to figure it out. Now, I still believe, even if we decide to do that I think we said that affordable housing was a priority. So if it is a priority, we still have to come back to this conversation and to determine what that is. And to your point, Ms. Terracio, and that is, if this is what we're saying that is a priority, then it's now our responsibility to communicate what affordable housing is to eliminate that stigma. And so I think that we do go on a campaign to tell people, how Richland County has defined affordable housing. So I love the idea that Mr. Livingston brought forth, and I'm prepared to make a motion to that point if the time is right.
Thank you, Ms. Barron, and I think we are maybe getting close to that time. Can I also just say, I've heard a lot of support for down payment support, and I really appreciate the support for home ownership. And I would also just like to say that ACA Jensen mentioned the buy down kind of program, and I think that you referenced that in terms of more of a rental capacity. Is that also something that could be is that kind of, in addition to say down payment programs, could a buy down program be supportive of folks for home ownership rather than rental? Okay, yes, you're recognized.
Thank you. Absolutely. I've, again, seen it many different ways. I've seen it where the program bought down the cost of the loan. I've seen it where it paid for a down payment that was, again, forgivable over time. I've seen many different ways that it's handled. So, yes, those are all options.
Thank you. Yeah, Ms. Mackey.
Thank you. I just wanted to share my thoughts. I am definitely in support of, Mr. Livingston's suggestion. I would like to see not all of it go to that type of organization. I would like to at least look at some split to where there is a targeted focus on either down payment assistance or helping to identify rental placement or something as it relates to, teachers, law enforcement, emergency folks, because they definitely need it. I've heard it from our districts, and even neighboring Fairfield has already worked to develop something like this for their teachers. And we hear it from both of our districts, Richland 1 and Richland 2. There is an issue with teachers because, as we all know here in the state, they're not getting paid what they should get paid. And there is an issue with teachers finding affordable housing. And I do think some of this money should be looked at and set aside for a targeted approach, working with them to figure out a way to help our law enforcement and our teachers get into homes in Richland County.
Thank you, Chair Mackey. And I see hands up. I would like to just recognize myself and ask Chair Mackey that perhaps in this vision, could you see that in an application process for such housing, that folks who have who are an employee, a public servant, if you will, would get sort of an extra point or extra bump up on their application if they had that kind of service, if they're current?
Well, I guess when we think about the initial kind of thought of working with an organization that already does this, those organizations already have their application, right? And they have kind of what they want to follow, and they go out and do it. And it may mean that they're just working with a developer to create more units in particular zip codes. But that doesn't mean that those new units are actually going to teachers or law enforcement. That just means they're creating new units, which is needed. We definitely need that. So I'm saying I think it should be that and, right? I think there is a way to look at, there's enough money to split to say some can go to that organization and another part of the money can go to working with the school district and law enforcement to figure out if they're a down payment assistant program that, if they commit to staying with the employment for this such time, there's down payment. Or the example in Fairfield is they work with a local developer that basically they partner with him. He rehabbed, a old apartment complex, and it was agreed upon that you only rent to law enforcement and teachers, period. And here's the rate, right? And that was kind of the deal. And so I think there's a way to look at making sure we get our general population, but then also helping some of the targeted population with our teachers and law enforcement that we know need the extra help, and we want to make sure they can actually be in homes or be able to rent and afford.
Thank you. And I'm sorry, I jumped the line. I know there were other hands up. Yeah, Mr. Livingston.
Yeah, and so my suggestion would be too, when you get the feedback from those organizations in terms of they're trying to utilize the funds, is you can state, consider, down payment, law enforcement, teachers or whatever. You can state that, and they can tell you how they're going to use the $4 million and to do those things that you state.
Thank you. did I see Ms. Barron's hand up?
Yes, you did.
Okay.
So to Mr. Livingston's point, that was one of the things that, I was just kind of pondering. If we decide to move forward with a process like this, I think that I had 3 categories. And in these 3 categories that they would, the entities would have to, tell us, okay, I'm applying for X amount of dollars for a down payment program focusing on teachers and first responders. Or another group could be for the buy down program or rehabbing existing units. And so those would be, the way I see it is that, as a part of this application, they would select and tell us what they're applying for. And then when we get the applications, we can review and say, okay, we're going to award this one at X amount of dollars, kind of like what we do with community impact. We would award X amount of dollars to this organization for the down payment program and X amount of dollars for rehabbing existing units. I'm kind of thinking, because I think that helps us get to where we need to go with using the same process versus having to create 2 and 3 mechanisms to get where we need to go.
Thank you. Not to push anything, but yes, Mr. Weaver.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, it seems like, we want to cover several bases here. Should we ask staff to contact Columbia Housing, would be rental assistance, obviously in the Midlands, and then we could contact staff from South Carolina Housing to come and talk about down payment assistance. So that would cover those 2 bases. Should we do that in time for our next housing meeting, if the chair feels appropriate, or?
So I'm sorry, Ms. Barron, you might have been prepared with a motion.
Yeah, so I am prepared for a motion, but I just want to comment on what Mr. Weaver stated. I think that we just need to open up an application process. And and to some degree, yeah, maybe we could, it's easy to go into an agreement with Columbia Housing because what's it called, Mr. Brown, an intergovernmental agreement or something. It's easy to do that, but I still think that there may be entities out there that we don't know. And so with that, getting everyone a fair chance to be seated at the table, I think the process works that way. So my motion would be, Ms. Terracio, and I don't know the language that I'm missing something in here, Mr. Brown, and that would be, I move to direct the administrator to create a process, an application process. I don't know if it's an application process or if it's going to be a RFP. Can you help me with that?
It wouldn't be an RFP
RFQ?
based off what you all are describing. It sounds like you have money that you are trying to provide access to, and you're trying to figure out who you're going to give it to. So
Application.
I think it's just an application, and you will just decide based off what you receive whether or not you will fund them and what ways you would fund them.
Okay, so thank you. So I move to direct the administrator to create an application focusing on an application to award $4 million for affordable housing, focusing on the priorities of down payment programs with giving priority to teachers and first responders, pay down programs, and rehabbing existing units.
Second, and just may I have a very friendly amendment? Because you said 4 million, I would say up to 4 million.
You're right. That's
Okay.
the language.
Okay,
I'm good with it.
thank you. And then, I'm sorry, I saw Mr. Pugh.
Are we in the discussion phase?
Yes, so it's been moved and seconded. Discussion, Mr. Pugh.
Are we going to develop some type of deliverables for these people that are receiving these funds so we can make sure that they're doing actually what we're trying to get them?
Mr. Pugh, I'm looking at Attorney Wright, and I'm thinking that there would be probably a very, an agreement that they would enter into with the county.
Right. I think there would be some sort of agreement, whether it's depends on who the organization is, was an IGA, MOU, or some sort of agreement. that we would have to get into before we would give the money to do anything. And I would, just consideration, we talk about teachers and law enforcement, and you might, consider county employees as well.
Yes, public servants, yes.
Oh, that's so wide.
Thank you, Mr. Wright. And I would hope that we would have accountability because I'd like to cut a ribbon or hang a wreath on a bunch of doors. Thank you. Ms. Barron.
So, and to that point, I think that this process is somewhat similar to something that we've done. I can't believe I just did it again, but something that we've done in the past. Sorry, ACA Thomas. I see you. She's like hyperventilating over there. It's going to be an easy process, I think, a lot easier. But with that, Mr. Pugh made a mention about deliverables. I think that we need to be specific in those, in the application process, what it is that we're looking for. So I envision that we'll get a draft of an application that comes back, and that's going to be left up to us to determine, measurable goals and things of that nature, what is deemed successful with these funds. So I definitely think that we need to include as many details as possible in this process.
Thank you, Ms. Barron. I saw Mr. Weaver first.
Okay, so I'm confused on what exactly we're saying here. Are we saying that we want to award these funds to another group with our criteria? Or are we saying the funds are coming from Richland County directly to these folks? Like if you're a tenant, you get a check from Richland County? That's what I'm confused at.
I'm
So
sorry.
based off Madam Chair, may I clarify my
Yes, but
understanding?
ACA Jensen was looking at me. Do you? Okay, sorry.
Thank you. So what I heard is that the application process would hear from community organizations, nonprofits, or whomever that does these type of programs.
Okay.
That they would present information that would say, we can do these things related to affordable housing in these ways. Your application process would say you would be looked at more favorably if you target teachers or whatever parameters there, but all these groups have the same availability to give you that information. You then, as committee members and ultimately council, will decide based on what you received, which of these programs, whether it's one or two, or whatever you determine,
Right.
you will use the $4 million or up to $4 million to support them doing that work that they have dictated through their application process that you find meets your criteria and how you want to serve affordable housing in Richland County. So what I'm not hearing is that there's one group or two groups. That will all depend on what you decide. You just are asking us to reach out to get that information for the number of groups that may exist who can affect this particular part of the business that of the county is trying to affect.
Follow up.
Just a quick follow-up. So I understand now. So we're saying these groups come in, this committee screens the groups as to what they can do for affordable housing, and then we can make a recommendation to council on who gets what for the groups.
That's what I took from the motion that was made
Okay,
by Ms. Barron.
fantastic. Okay.
Ms. Mackey, thanks for your patience.
No worries. I guess I want to go back, 'cause I think Ms. Barron asked this, and as I listen to it, I'm in question of the process in which I heard you say, I don't view that as an application. I view it as a request for qualifications, whereas we are saying, we, the county, are putting out, we are looking for agencies that can fill these types of programs, and you submit your qualifications to us, but not that we're creating an application for them to fill out. So that's, I guess, why are we creating an application for them to respond to? Because I feel like that's also somehow we've gotten ourselves in a situation before where we create an application, they put all this stuff in, and then it's like, okay, well, can they really? Or are they just creating themselves to fit our application? Whereas I would prefer to see qualifications submitted of where you have already done this somewhere and we can look at it. Does that make sense?
it makes sense. And to answer your question directly is because Ms. Barron utilized, she said, I think we should have the same process that we've gone through before. And that's what was my point of reference. So she did ask a question about whether it should be an application or an RF. So, but that's why I use that terminology. So could it be an RFQ? We could simplify it. We can do exactly what you're saying.
Okay.
That's just where I took the meaning from.
Not on this committee, but I would, I would think it is a more of a RFQ where we specifically state what it is that we want, and then folks respond back to us that can meet those needs versus putting an application out there. And I feel like we're gonna get a whole lot of stuff that then we're gonna have to go. And I just think we should put out there more specifically what it is that we would want.
Thank you. I see Ms. Barron. I also see our staff talking. So do you want to speak to that? Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. So the team was just asking, would it be appropriate for us to consider us bringing back you a scope of work that you could consider at your next affordable housing meeting, that you could then say, yes, this is what we're looking for, or we could modify it and we would take that particular scope that you vote on, members of the committee, to then council.
Thank you. Ms. Barron.
So that was going to be what I'd asked for. Because when I asked my original question, in my mind, I was thinking, I said RFP, but RFQ, that would be the best mode or the best way to go, I believe. So that was the intent when I was making my motion. God knows I don't want to put ACA Thomas through, as least as possible. So I'm good with that.
Okay.
Just to that point. And I don't know if I need to change my motion because I said application. Do I need to change?
I think you can change that, and if you wanted to add any other people, like county employees as well.
I'm sorry.
Sir, with all the love in my heart,
Or public
your time.
servants.
Public servants, right?
public servant, and then, that is the word that ACA Jensen used earlier was subjective.
Okay.
That public servant thing is subjective. So we're not going to do that. I'm going to stay back to my motion. And with my motion, I just like to, can I just do an amendment to the amendment? Or just change because Ms. Teresa did a friendly amendment to
Right.
include a word.
If I do the friendly amendment to make it an RFQ and you would accept that, then I think that would cover us and we could vote?
Call for the question.
That's correct.
Okay. All right, we'll take the vote.
Teresa,
Yes?
Weaver,
Yes.
Barron.
Yes.
Motion approved.
Thank you. That'll bring us to item 5,
Move to
adjournment.
adjourn?
Second?
Teresa,
Yes.
Weaver,
Yes.
Barron.
Yes.
Motion approved.
Okay, thank you. And we have rules and appointments next, which I think is the same folks on this committee. So we might need a moment for administration, to get everything changed over. Yes.